The storm was a wild thing, an animal clawing at the walls of the cabin. Rain hammered the wood like 1,000 tiny fists. Lightning tore the sky open, and for a split second, the world outside was stark white, a ghost of a forest. Inside, Silas Thornton's hands didn't shake, not even a little. Sweat dripped from his brow, tracing the long, jagged scar that cut a path from his temple to his jaw. A permanent reminder of a life he tried to forget. On the rough wooden table in front of him, a woman lay still, too still. Her breathing was a shallow whisper, her skin as pale as a fresh snowfall. A dark crimson stain was spreading across the bandages on her side, a terrifying flower blooming in the dim lamplight. "Stay with me," he whispered. The words weren't for her. She couldn't hear him. The words were for himself, a prayer to a God he no longer believed in. His fingers, thick and calloused from years of survival, moved with a surgeon's grace, cleaning the wound, threading the needle, preparing to stitch together the life that was trying to slip away. Thunder cracked right overhead, so loud it felt like the roof was about to splinter and fall in on them. Silas paused. He looked down at her face. Even unconscious, her features were delicate, but there was a strength in the line of her jaw, a stubbornness he was starting to recognize. Something twisted in his gut, a feeling he had taken great pains to bury 6 feet under. "I swore I would never save another life," he murmured, the words swallowed by the storm. But that oath was broken the moment she stumbled out of the darkness and into his life. Beside him on the table, his silver pocket watch gleamed. The light caught its polished surface, showing the hands forever frozen. They were stopped at 8:17. Silas glanced at it, his jaw tightening into a line as hard as granite. That was the moment, the exact moment his entire world had ended. And now, looking at the woman on his table, he knew something with terrifying certainty. Sometimes fate doesn't ask for your permission, it just kicks the door in. It had all started 3 weeks earlier. The Montana Territory in the spring of 1879 was a vast, untamed beast of a land. The wind smelled of pine and the promise of rain. Silas Thornton rode into the dusty town of Silver Creek, and he looked like a man who was expecting trouble. His shoulders were broad and stiff. His eyes, hidden under the brim of a worn hat, were constantly scanning, missing nothing. Tied to his saddle was an old medical bag. The leather was cracked and faded, a perfect match for the man who carried it. There was a dark stain on the cuff of his shirt, dried blood, the result of a little disagreement on the trail with a bounty hunter who thought he was fast. He wasn't. Silas hadn't planned on stopping. Get some water for his horse, a few supplies, and be gone. Silver Creek was supposed to be just another speck of dust on the map, a place to ride through and leave behind. He was done with people. He was done with their troubles. The general store was at the end of the street, its sign creaking a lonely song in the wind. He swung down from his horse, his movements smooth and economical. He tied the reins, gave the animal a familiar pat on the neck, and stepped onto the wooden porch. The boards groaned under his weight. Inside, the store was a mix of smells: coffee and leather, dried fruit and dust. He stood in the doorway for a second, letting his eyes adjust to the dim light. He scanned every corner, every shadow. It was a habit he'd learned the hard way. Danger likes to hide in plain sight. And that's when he saw her. She was standing near the back, a single shaft of sunlight cutting through the gloom to land right on her. Her name, he would later learn, was Catherine Montgomery. She wore a simple blue dress, and her hair was pulled back in a bun, except for one stubborn curl that had escaped to dance against her cheek. But it wasn't how she looked that made Silas freeze. It was what she was doing. An old woman sat in a chair next to her, her eyes clouded over with blindness. Catherine held a letter, and she was reading it out loud. Her voice was like music, clear and warm, cutting through the silence of the store. "And the apple trees have blossomed early this year," she read. "Little Thomas asks about you every day, Mama. He keeps your picture by his bed and says goodnight to it." The old woman smiled, a pure happy thing. Her wrinkled hands were clasped in her lap. "That's my grandson," she said, her voice filled with pride. "He's a good boy." "The best," Catherine agreed, and the smile she gave was so genuine it seemed to light up her whole face. Silas just stood there, watching. He couldn't remember the last time he'd seen something so kind. A small, simple act of goodness in a world that had shown him nothing but cruelty. It felt like a lifetime ago. Then, as if she could feel his eyes on her, Catherine looked up. Their gazes met across the cluttered room, and for a long second, the world just stopped. She didn't look away. Most women would have. A man like him, scarred and weathered, usually made people nervous. But she just held his gaze, her eyes steady. It felt like she was looking right past the rough exterior, seeing something inside him that even he had forgotten was there. It was a strange moment, a silent recognition, like two people who have walked the same hard road, spotting each other across an empty plain. The spell was broken when the blind woman touched her arm. "Is someone there, dear?" "Yes, Mrs. Watson, a customer," Catherine said, her voice calm again. She folded the letter neatly and placed it in the old woman's hand. "I'll finish it for you tomorrow." "Bless you, child," the old woman said. Silas finally moved. He walked deeper into the store, giving Catherine a slight nod as he passed. He started gathering his supplies: coffee, ammunition, dried beef, a new shirt to replace the one with the bloodstain. He was aware of her every movement as she helped the old woman to her feet and guided her to the door. Once Mrs. Watson was gone, Catherine returned to the counter. She started straightening a display of ribbons, her hands moving with a nervous energy. Silas walked up and placed his items on the worn wood. "You have a gift," he said. His voice was rough, like an engine that hadn't been started in a long time. "Reading like that?" She looked up, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "Thank you. Mrs. Watson lost her sight last winter. Her family's out in Oregon. The letters are all she has." Silas just nodded. He noticed the way she tugged at her sleeves, pulling them down over her wrists. But he was fast. He'd seen it. Dark, ugly bruises, circling her wrists like a pair of cruel bracelets. "That'll be $1.45, she said, her voice all business now. As Silas reached for his money, the back door of the store flew open. It slammed against the wall with a crack that made the bell above the front door jingle wildly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. A man stepped in. Preston Whitfield. He moved like he owned the ground he walked on. He was tall, dressed in a tailored suit that cost more than most folks in Silver Creek made in a year. A gold watch chain was draped across his vest. His hair was dark, with streaks of silver, slicked back from his forehead. His face was clean-shaven and flushed, the look of a man who enjoyed expensive whiskey. "Miss Montgomery," he boomed, his voice smooth but with an edge of steel. "I've been looking for you." Catherine straightened up like a soldier coming to attention. Her face became a blank mask. "Mr. Whitfield, I was just helping a customer." Whitfield's eyes flicked over to Silas, dismissing him in a single glance, like he was a piece of furniture. "I don't pay you to read stories to old women. There's inventory that needs counting." "Yes, sir. I've already completed the monthly accounts." Whitfield stepped closer, and Silas saw Catherine take a tiny, almost invisible step back. "And the shipment from Helena?" Whitfield pressed. "Has it been properly documented?" "Yes, sir. Everything is in order." Whitfield finally turned his full attention to Silas. His eyes narrowed, taking in the stranger's worn clothes, the hard set of his jaw, the scar. "A visitor to our little town?" Whitfield asked, holding out a hand. "Preston Whitfield. I own most of what you see in Silver Creek. We always welcome civilized travelers." The way he said civilized was an insult. Silas looked at the outstretched hand for a beat, then gave it a short, firm shake. "Silas Thornton, just passing through." Something changed in Whitfield's face, a flicker of recognition, then calculation. "Thornton," he said slowly, "from the 12th Virginia Regiment?" Silas felt that old familiar tension coil in his stomach. That was a long time ago. "Army Surgeon Thornton," Whitfield said, a smile on his face that never reached his eyes. "I heard you saved a great many lives, and lost some as well." The words hung in the air like a threat. Silas's hand tightened into a fist at his side. "The war's over, Whitfield." "Is it?" Whitfield replied, his voice soft. "Some might say it merely changed battlefields." He turned back to Catherine. "I want those ledgers on my desk by noon, and Miss Montgomery, make sure they balance. To the penny." He didn't have to raise his voice. The menace was crystal clear. Catherine just nodded, her face pale. Of course, Mr. Whitfield. Whitfield gave Silas one last look, a look that sized him up and found him wanting. Enjoy your stay in Silver Creek, Dr. Thornton, however brief it may be. Then he was gone, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence behind him. Catherine let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for an eternity. She quickly finished ringing up his purchase, her hands fumbling slightly. Your employer seems particular, Silas said, choosing the word carefully. A ghost of a sad smile touched her lips. Mr. Whitfield has very high standards. For his businesses and for the people who work in them, Silas observed. He watched as she, once again, unconsciously, pulled her sleeve down over her wrist. He saw the bruises again. Their eyes met, and in that moment, he saw past her brave face. He saw the fear. He saw the desperation. It was a look he knew well, the look of a trapped animal. Your change, sir, she said, her voice quiet. Silas took the coins and his supplies. He turned to leave. He was almost at the door, ready to put this town and its troubles in his dust. But something made him stop. Something made him turn back. I saw those bruises, he said, his voice low and flat, but it carried across the quiet store. Her head snapped up. Her eyes were wide with a mix of shock and fear. He took a step closer. He didn't know where the words came from. They just came. I don't care what he has on you. Pack a bag. I'm coming back for you. She stared at him, her mouth slightly open. You can't just say that. I never say anything I don't mean, he replied. She looked at him, really looked at him, searching his face for a trick, for some hidden angle. She found nothing but a tired sort of determination. Her gaze dropped to the floor. You don't understand, she whispered. You don't know what you're getting into. I understand enough, Silas said. She glanced nervously toward the back door, where Whitfield had disappeared. She leaned closer across the counter. I was the headmistress of a girls' academy in Charleston, she said, her voice barely audible. After the war, my father borrowed money from Preston to rebuild it. When my father died of a fever, Preston took everything. The school, the land, everything. Now I work for him to pay off a debt that never gets any smaller. Silas listened. He didn't say a word. He just absorbed the story, another tale of post-war ruin and predatory greed. You should go, she said, her voice urgent now. Mr. Whitfield doesn't like strangers, especially strangers who take an interest in his property. Silas gave her one last, long look. He nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. Then he turned and walked out the door. But just as his hand touched the handle, he felt something small and folded being pressed into his palm. He didn't have to look. He knew it was from her. Outside, in the bright, unforgiving Montana sun, he unfolded the small piece of paper. The handwriting was neat and precise. I know who you are. You saved my brother's life at the Wilderness Campaign. I owe you a debt. Meet me behind the saloon at midnight, if your offer is real. Silas stared at the note. His plan had been simple. Ride in, ride out. Leave the world behind. Now it seemed the world wasn't quite done with him yet. He tucked the note into his pocket, untied his horse, and rode slowly down the main street. He had planned to be miles away from Silver Creek by noon. Now it looked like he had a reason to stay until midnight, and he had a feeling that midnight was going to change everything. He made his camp down by the creek that gave the town its name. It was a quiet spot, hidden from the main road. He spent the long afternoon waiting. He cleaned his revolver, the familiar weight of it in his hands, a strange comfort. He checked his supplies. He thought about what he was getting himself into. This was exactly what he had sworn he would never do again. Get involved. Take on someone else's fight. He knew where that road led. It led to pain. It led to loss. And yet, here he was. He pulled the silver pocket watch from his vest. The metal was cool against his skin. He clicked it open. The hands were still frozen at 8:17. He ran his thumb over the inscription on the inside of the lid. To heal is to hope. Forever yours, Julia. He snapped it shut, shoving it back into his pocket before the memories could take hold. The memories were ghosts, and he had learned long ago that you can't fight ghosts. Midnight came, and the saloon was still going strong. Loud piano music and even louder laughter spilled out into the darkness. Silas stood in the shadows of the alley behind it. His horse was already saddled, packed with enough provisions for two. He'd spent the last hour circling the town, making sure he wasn't being watched. It was an old habit from the war, a habit that had kept him breathing on more than one occasion. The back door of the saloon creaked open. A rectangle of yellow light cut through the darkness. A figure slipped out. It was Catherine. She had changed into a dark, practical traveling dress. Her hair was braided and tucked under a bonnet. She carried a small bag in one hand and clutched a thick book in a small wooden box to her chest with the other. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Silas said, his voice a low rumble from the shadows. She jumped, startled. Then her eyes found him. "I wasn't sure either," she admitted, her voice just a whisper. He stepped out of the darkness and took her bag. "We need to go, now." "I don't know what I'm doing," she said, and for the first time he heard a tremor of fear in her voice. "But I know I can't stay here. Not one more day." "I have a cabin, 3 days' ride from here," he told her, "or I can take you to another town. Your choice." "I have nowhere else to go," she said, her voice getting stronger, steadier. The fear was still there, but resolve was winning. He nodded. He led her to his horse, helped her mount, and then swung up into the saddle behind her. They rode out of Silver Creek at a steady walk, not fast enough to draw attention, but with a purpose that was unmistakable. Only when the last light of the town had vanished behind them did Silas urge the horse into a gallop. They flew through the darkness, putting as much distance as they could between themselves and Preston Whitfield before the sun came up. They rode in silence. The only sounds were the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves and the whisper of the wind. Catherine sat stiffly in front of him, trying not to lean back against his chest. But as the hours wore on and exhaustion began to set in, he could feel her start to sag. Her head would nod forward, and then she'd jerk awake. Just before dawn, as the sky began to turn from black to a soft gray, he finally spoke. "There's a creek up ahead," he said, his voice close to her ear. "We'll stop there, rest the horse. You need to sleep." She just nodded, too tired to argue. The spot was perfect, sheltered by tall pines with fresh water bubbling over smooth stones. He helped her down from the horse, and her legs were so unsteady she almost collapsed. "Gather some kindling," he said, giving her a simple task to focus on. Small, dry twigs. While she was gone, he unsaddled the horse and laid out a bedroll for her near a small, protected fire pit. When she came back, he had a small fire crackling to life. "You should rest," he said, taking the wood from her. "I'll keep watch." "Aren't you tired?" she asked. "I'm used to it," he replied. It was the truth. Sleep hadn't been a friend of his for a very long time. She hesitated for a moment, then sank down onto the bedroll. She placed her book in the wooden box carefully beside her, always within reach. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for coming back." He just nodded, his face unreadable in the flickering firelight. "Get some sleep. We ride again at noon." She lay down, pulling a thin blanket over herself. As she was drifting off, she spoke again, her voice soft and sleepy. "The Wilderness Campaign. That's where you saved my brother." Silas looked over at her. He was surprised she knew the specifics. "Your brother?" "Michael Montgomery. He was only 17. He wrote home about an army surgeon who stitched him up. Said you told him stories about Virginia to keep his mind off the pain." Silas stared into the fire. He tried to remember. But there had been so many boys, so many wounds, so many stories told to distract from the butchery. They all blurred together into one long nightmare of blood and cannon smoke. "You saved him," she murmured, her eyes closing. "That's why I trusted you. I knew what kind of man you were." Silas didn't say anything. He just watched her sleep. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. She thought she knew what kind of man he was. But she was wrong. She knew the man he had been a lifetime ago, before the war ended, before he lost everything, before 8/17. He pulled out the pocket watch again. He clicked it open and stared at the frozen hands. In the growing light of dawn, he could see his own reflection in the silver case. The scar, the beard he'd grown to hide the worst of it, the eyes that had seen too much. "You don't know me at all." he whispered to the sleeping woman, and he hoped, for her sake, that she never would. They rode for 2 more days, sticking to trails that were little more than deer paths. Silas pushed them hard, but he was careful. He was mindful of the horse carrying 2 people and of the woman who was clearly not used to this kind of life. They didn't talk much during the day. The miles unspooled in a tense silence. But at night, around the small campfire, the words started to come. On the second night, she finally asked the question that had been hanging in the air between them. "Your scar," she said, her voice soft. "Was it from the war?" His hand went to his face, his fingers tracing the familiar raised line of ruined flesh. "No," he said after a long pause. "After." She didn't press. She just waited, giving him the space to either talk or not. He stared into the flames, his eyes seeing something far away. "I was a surgeon in Richmond. After the war, I had a practice, a house, a life." The words came out slowly, like he was digging them out of frozen ground. "Lost it all." "I'm sorry," she said. He just nodded. He poured coffee into 2 tin cups and handed one to her. As he did, his sleeve rode up his arm. Just for a second. But she saw it. Another scar. This one was different. It was a thin, white horizontal line across the inside of his wrist. A scar that could only have been made one way. Deliberately. He saw her eyes fix on it. He saw the flicker of understanding, the flash of pity she tried to hide. He pulled his sleeve down quickly. "That wasn't from the war either," he said, his voice flat, daring her to ask. Her breath hitched, but she held his gaze. "What happened?" He took a long drink of the bitter coffee. "I was a good doctor. Respected. People trusted me." He paused, the muscles in his jaw working. "I married a woman named Julia. She was a nurse. We met in a field hospital. She was everything." The fire crackled, sending a shower of sparks up into the darkness. "There was a sickness that winter. Pneumonia. It swept through the city. I had a dozen patients with it, including Julia." He stopped talking. The silence stretched out, thick with unspoken pain. "I prescribed a medicine," he finally continued, his voice barely a whisper. "A new tincture. It was supposed to be stronger, faster. I got a shipment from a supplier I trusted." His knuckles were white where he gripped the tin cup. "The medicine was bad, tainted, diluted with river water and God knows what else. It wasn't just useless. It was poison." He looked up at her, his eyes hollow. 12 people died. My patients, my wife. They died because I gave them poison with my own hands." "It wasn't your fault," Catherine said, her voice filled with a desperate sort of kindness. "I prescribed it," he shot back, the words like stones. "I was their doctor. It was my responsibility." "The supplier was responsible," she argued gently. "The one who tampered with the medicine." He looked at her, and for the first time, it felt like he was really seeing her. "You sound like her," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "Julia?" She would have said the same thing. "What happened after?" she asked. "I tried to find out who did it. I traced the shipment. I asked questions, but every door slammed in my face. Records went missing. People who knew something suddenly couldn't remember." He set his cup down with a sharp click. "Then one night I came home. My office was destroyed. All my research, all my notes, gone. The next day I got a message, a simple note. It said, 'Stop asking questions or you'll join your wife.' The threat was as real now as it had been all those years ago. So I stopped asking," Silas said, his voice dead. "I started drinking instead. I lost my practice. I lost the house. I lost everything." His hand unconsciously went to his wrist, to the thin white line hidden beneath his sleeve. "One night I decided I'd lost enough." "But you survived," she said softly. "A friend found me. An old army buddy. He patched me up and dragged me out here. Said I needed to get away from the ghosts." He let out a short, bitter laugh. "I've been running from them ever since." They sat in silence for a long time. The only sound was the fire. "Thank you," she finally said, "for telling me." He just nodded. He stood up abruptly, ending the conversation. "Get some sleep. We have a long ride tomorrow." But that night, Silas dreamt of Julia, not the pale, dying woman in the bed. He dreamt of her laughing, her red hair catching the sun, her hand in his. He woke up before dawn, his heart pounding, the ghost of her touch still on his skin. Across the dying embers of the fire, Catherine was sleeping. Her face was peaceful. One hand was curled around that strange wooden box she always kept with her. Watching her, Silas felt something shift inside him. It felt like a crack forming in a thick wall of ice, and it terrified him. On the third day, the world exploded. They were riding through a dense pine forest. The trail was soft, muffling the sound of the horses' hooves. The quiet had lulled them into a false sense of peace. That was their first mistake. The horse was the first to know. Its ears shot forward. It faltered, tossing its head. Silas reacted instantly. He reined the horse in, his hand already moving toward the revolver at his hip. "Get down," he snapped. Before Catherine could even move, a rifle shot cracked through the air. The bullet splintered the bark of a tree, inches from his head. The horse screamed and reared up, fighting the reins. Silas wrestled the panicked animal with one hand, drawing his gun with the other. "Run!" he yelled at Catherine. Two men stepped out from behind the trees, rifles leveled. Catherine slid off the horse, stumbling as her feet hit the ground. Silas fired twice. The shots were deafening in the enclosed space. The two men dove for cover. He used that split second to dismount, grabbing his medical bag from the saddle and yanking Catherine behind the massive trunk of a pine tree. "Who are they?" she gasped, her face white with fear. "Doesn't matter," he said grimly, reloading his pistol with swift, practiced movements. Another shot hit the tree above their heads, showering them with splinters of wood. The horse, finally breaking free, bolted down the trail, taking most of their supplies with it. "Stay here," Silas ordered, his voice low and deadly calm. "If I don't come back, head south. Follow the creek. My cabin is about 5 miles that way. Red Rock Bluff. You can't miss it." Before she could say a word, he was gone. He melted into the trees, moving with a silent speed that was terrifying. He wasn't a doctor anymore. He was something else. Something from the war. A predator. Catherine pressed herself against the tree, her heart hammering against her ribs. She could hear the blood rushing in her ears. A shot echoed through the forest. Then another. Then silence. A heavy, awful silence. She clutched the wooden box to her chest, her knuckles white. A twig snapped nearby. She held her breath. "It's me," Silas's voice came from the shadows. "It's over." He stepped back into the small clearing. There was a fresh cut over his eyebrow, blood trickling down his face. But he was alive. His medical bag had fallen open during the fight, its contents spilling onto the pine needles. Catherine rushed to help him gather everything up, and then she froze. She saw what was inside. It wasn't just bandages and salves. There were surgical instruments, scalpels, forceps, clamps, vials of medicine. All of it was clean, organized, and meticulously cared for. This wasn't the kit of a man who had given up. "You said you quit medicine," she said, her voice accusing. She held up a scalpel, still in its protective leather case. His face hardened. "I gave up on people, not the tools." "These aren't just tools," she pressed, gesturing to the perfectly ordered kit. "This is the bag of a man who still hopes he might have to save someone, a man who still cares." "Don't," he warned, his voice a low growl. They gathered the rest of his things in a tense silence. The horse was gone. Their food was gone. Their water was gone. "What about them?" she asked, nodding toward the trees where the ambushers had been. "One of them got away," Silas said. "The other one won't be bothering anyone ever again." His tone made it clear the discussion was over. The sun was setting. They were on foot, miles from shelter, and they were being hunted. "We need to move," Silas said, shouldering the heavy medical bag. They set off, following the creek. As darkness fell, the forest became a different place, a place of strange sounds and deep shadows. Silas stopped dead. He held up a hand for silence. Catherine froze. She listened. At first she heard nothing. Then she heard it too. The faint snap of a branch, somewhere behind them. "Someone's following us," Silas whispered, his gun back in his hand. "The one who ran. He must have circled back." Catherine's hand went to the wooden box. What do we do? We split up, he said, his mind already working. You follow the creek. It will lead you straight to the cabin. I'll lead him away. No, she protested. I won't leave you. This isn't a discussion, he said firmly. He pressed the key to his cabin into her hand. Red rock bluff, oak door, iron hinges. Go. Stay low and stay quiet. She hesitated. I know these woods, he assured her. Now, go. With one last look at him, she turned and disappeared into the darkness along the creek. Silas waited until he was sure she was gone. Then he took a deep breath and deliberately stepped on a dry branch, making a loud crack. He moved away from the creek, deeper into the forest. He made just enough noise to be followed. He was leading their pursuer into his world now, a world of shadows and silence, a world where a man like Silas Thornton could become a ghost. The storm broke just as he saw his cabin. Rain came down in solid sheets, soaking him to the bone in seconds. It washed the blood and dirt from his face. He had led the man on a long, twisting chase through the forest before finally losing him and doubling back. Lightning flashed, and he saw it. The cabin, tucked under a massive red rock bluff, just as he described. And there was smoke coming from the chimney. A wave of relief washed over him. She'd made it. She was safe. But the relief was quickly replaced by a cold knot of dread. The smoke. On a clear day, it would be a beacon. But in this storm, maybe it was okay. He approached the cabin cautiously, his eyes scanning the tree line. He knocked on the door. Twice, then once. A signal he'd forgotten to tell her about. No answer. He tried the handle. It was unlocked. The door swung open. The cabin was warm. A fire was burning in the hearth. A single oil lamp cast a soft glow over the simple room. But Catherine wasn't there. Catherine, he called out, stepping inside. A soft groan came from the corner of the room. He saw her then. She was lying on the narrow bed, her face a ghostly white. One hand was pressed to her side. Her dress was dark with fresh blood. He was across the room in 2 strides. What happened? He was here, she whispered, her voice strained with pain. He was waiting for me. She moved her hand, revealing a deep, vicious knife wound in her side. In that instant, the runner, the ghost, the man fleeing his past, he was gone. Dr. Silas Thornton took his place. He grabbed his medical bag. I need to see that wound, he said, his voice calm, authoritative, the voice he hadn't used in years. He helped her sit up, his touch gentle but firm. He carefully cut away the blood-soaked fabric. It's deep, he assessed, his eyes narrowed in concentration. But it looks clean. I think it missed anything vital. You're lucky. Doesn't feel lucky, she gasped. I need to stitch this, he told her, already laying out his instruments. It's going to hurt. I trust you, she whispered. Those 3 words hit him like a physical blow. He looked at her, at the absolute faith in her eyes. How long had it been since anyone had looked at him like that? Since anyone had seen the doctor, and not the monster? He placed his silver pocket watch on the table beside them, the hand still pointing to 8:17, a reminder of his greatest failure. Outside, the storm raged. Stay with me, he murmured as he picked up the needle. And as he worked, his hands steady, his focus absolute, he felt that old broken oath crumble into dust. He was a healer. He had been born a healer. And tonight, by saving this woman, Silas Thornton was finally starting to heal himself. Catherine woke up to the sun. It streamed through the single window of the cabin, illuminating a million dancing dust motes. For a second, she didn't know where she was. The rough-hewn ceiling, the smell of pine smoke, the dull, throbbing ache in her side. Then it all came rushing back. The escape, the ambush, the man waiting in the cabin, the knife. She tried to sit up and gasped as a sharp pain shot through her. The sound must have carried because the cabin door opened, and Silas stepped inside. He was carrying a load of firewood. His sleeves were rolled up, showing forearms that were corded with muscle. You're awake, he said. It wasn't a question. It was a simple statement of fact. How long? Her voice was a dry rasp. 2 days, he said. He poured water into a cup. cup and brought it to her. You lost a lot of blood. Had a fever. It broke last night. She took the cup with a shaky hand. She saw the dark circles under his eyes. Have you slept? He just shrugged. He moved to check her bandages, his touch professional and detached. The wound is clean. No sign of infection. You were lucky. You keep saying that, she murmured. I don't feel very lucky. A tiny smile, so fast she almost missed it, touched his lips. Being alive is luck enough most days. He helped her sit up, piling pillows behind her back. For a moment he was close, and she could smell the scent of pine and rain that clung to him. Thank you, she said, her voice quiet. You saved my life. He stepped back, uncomfortable. I stitched a wound. That's all. You could have left me, she said. It would have been easier. His eyes met hers, and she saw a flicker of something in their depths. Anger, maybe, that she would even think that. I'm not that far gone, he said, his voice low. She looked around the cabin. It was small and rustic, but it was organized, meticulously so. There was a small bookshelf filled with medical textbooks, a desk under the window with papers stacked in neat, precise piles, the mark of a disciplined mind. What happened to the man who attacked me? She asked. He ran, Silas said, stoking the fire. After he cut you, I found his tracks, headed west. He was waiting for me, she said, the memory becoming sharper, clearer. He knew my name. He said, Mr. Whitfield sends his regards. Silas froze, the poker still in his hand. Whitfield? How could he know about this place? I don't know, she answered. No one knew where we were going. The question hung in the air between them. How did he know? Silas ran a hand through his hair. This isn't safe, not anymore. Not if Whitfield knows where to find me. I can't travel, she pointed out. I know, he agreed, but as soon as you're strong enough, we move. Her heart sank. She had started to think of this cabin as a sanctuary. Where will we go? There's an old mining town, mostly abandoned. A couple of days from here. We can hide there, figure out what to do next. She nodded, a wave of weariness washing over her. More running. Suddenly a new fear gripped her. My things, she said, her voice rising in panic. The book. The box. They're over there, Silas said, nodding toward the desk. He wasn't interested in your bag. Just you. She sagged with relief. Then another thought hit her. That means Preston doesn't know what I took. He just wants me back. What did you take, Catherine? Silas asked, his eyes locking onto hers. She hesitated, then she made a decision. Help me to the table, I'll show you. He argued, but she insisted. He brought her the small wooden box. It was plain but beautifully made. A small brass lock held it shut. From a thin leather cord around her neck, hidden under her dress, she produced a tiny key. She unlocked the box and lifted the lid. Inside, resting on faded velvet, was a small leather-bound ledger. I found this, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. It was hidden in a locked drawer in Preston's desk. She opened it. The pages were filled with columns of names, dates, and figures. It's a record of his business dealings during the war. She turned to a specific page. Her finger traced a line of entries. There were small red stars next to them. These are shipments, she explained. Supplies he sold to both armies. But that's not the worst of it. These shipments, they were medicine. Tinctures, quinine, morphine. He sold them at full price. But they were diluted, contaminated. He knew they were useless. Her finger moved to another column, a list of names. And these are the men he bribed to look the other way. Army quartermasters, politicians, doctors. Silas stared at the page. His face went pale. He leaned closer. His hand was trembling as he pointed to one of the entries. Richmond, he whispered, the word barely audible. April, 1871. Catherine looked at him, her eyes full of a terrible sympathy. She nodded. The shipment that killed your wife, Silas, she said softly. It's in here. Preston Whitfield was the supplier. The world stopped. The only sound in the cabin was the crackling of the fire. All the air seemed to have been sucked out of the room. Silas's hand hovered over the page, over the neat, precise handwriting that condemned the man who had destroyed his life. All this time, he said, his voice hollow, broken. He was right there. You couldn't have known, she said gently. He closed the ledger, his movements slow and deliberate. Why did you take this? Why risk so much? Her gaze was steady, unflinching. Because men like Preston Whitfield don't stop. They just find new people to destroy. I thought, I thought if I had proof, there could be justice. Not just for me, for everyone he's hurt. Silas looked at her, and it was like he was seeing her for the first time. Not just a woman in trouble, but a woman with a spine of steel. Justice, he repeated the word. It felt foreign on his tongue. I stopped believing in that a long time ago. But you used to believe in healing, she countered softly. Maybe it's time to believe in both again. He didn't answer. He stood up and walked to the window, his back to her. He stared out at the wilderness, his shoulders tense. You need to rest, he said, his voice flat and controlled. She knew she was being dismissed. He needed to be alone with this new, terrible truth. As he helped her back to the bed, his touch was still gentle, but he felt a million miles away. She reached out and caught his wrist. I'm sorry, Silas, she said. About Julia, about all of it. For a split second, his mask slipped. She saw a flash of raw, unimaginable pain in his eyes. Then it was gone. Rest, he said again. He pulled his wrist free from her grasp and walked out of the cabin, closing the door softly behind him. Through the window, she could see him standing at the edge of the clearing, a lonely, silhouetted figure against the vast, indifferent wilderness. He was a man carrying the weight of a past that had just come back to haunt him with a vengeance. And Catherine closed her eyes, praying that by giving him the truth, she hadn't just handed him a death sentence. The days that followed were strange. Catherine slowly regained her strength. She could sit up, then stand, then walk around the small cabin. Silas was a ghost. He was attentive to her wound, changing the dressing with a clinical precision, but he barely spoke. He spent most of his time outside, hunting, chopping wood, or just sitting on the porch, staring out at the trees. It was like the revelation in the ledger had rebuilt the wall around him, thicker and higher than before. He slept on a bedroll by the fire every night, leaving the bed for her. On the fourth morning, she woke up to find the cabin empty. A pot of coffee was warm on the stove, and a note was on the table. Gone hunting. Stay inside. She felt a flicker of annoyance at the command, but she was also grateful for the quiet. The sun was shining, and the air coming through the window smelled sweet. She felt restless, trapped. She decided a few minutes on the porch wouldn't hurt. The fresh air felt wonderful. She sat in the single wooden chair, letting the sun warm her face. From here, she could see why he had chosen this spot. It was isolated, protected, peaceful. A movement at the edge of the woods caught her eye. It was a deer, a doe, stepping gracefully into the clearing. She was followed by a tiny spotted fawn. Catherine held her breath, not wanting to scare them. They were beautiful, a small, perfect moment of peace in the middle of all the chaos. Then she heard footsteps. The doe's head snapped up, and in a flash, she and her fawn were gone, vanishing back into the trees. Silas emerged from the forest, a pair of rabbits slung over his shoulder. He stopped when he saw her on the porch. You should be resting, he said. His tone was more tired than angry. I needed the air, she replied simply. He walked closer, his eyes assessing her. Fever's gone? Yes, I'm healing. Thanks to you. He nodded. Saw deer tracks by the creek, a doe and a fawn. They were right here, she said. You scared them away. A flicker of something, regret, crossed his face. They'll be back. They come to this clearing every spring. This small detail, the fact that he noticed things like that, gave her a glimpse of the man he was underneath the scars and the silence. Will you teach me how to skin those? She asked, nodding at the rabbits. If we're going to be on the run, I need to learn how to be useful. He looked surprised. It's not pleasant work. I'm not afraid of unpleasant work, she said, and I'm tired of being helpless. He considered her for a moment, then nodded. All right, but you sit while you do it. He set up a small workstation on the porch. With a patience she hadn't expected, He showed her what to do. His hands were sure and steady. Her first attempt was clumsy, but he didn't criticize her. He just reached over and adjusted her grip on the knife. His calloused fingers closed over hers for a brief second. "Like this," he said, his voice close to her ear. "Firm. Let the blade do the work." The sudden closeness sent a strange warmth through her. She focused on the task, hoping he couldn't see the blush rising in her cheeks. They worked in a comfortable silence. "The wilderness campaign," she said finally, breaking the quiet. "You really don't remember my brother, Michael?" Silas paused. "Tall kid, sandy hair, had a scar over his right eye?" Her face lit up. "Yes, that was him." A small, sad smile touched his lips. "I remember him. He wouldn't stop talking, kept asking me if the sunsets in Virginia were still as beautiful as he remembered." "That sounds like Michael," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "He always was a talker." "He was brave," Silas said. "I dug a mini ball out of his shoulder, and he never made a sound. Just kept talking about those sunsets." "He survived the war," she said, "but he died a few years later. A fever, the same one that took our father." She looked up at him. "He wrote to me about you. He said you had the steadiest hands he'd ever seen, and the saddest eyes." Silas looked away, uncomfortable. The war gave everyone sad eyes. "But not everyone kept healing people in the middle of it," she countered gently. "That's what he couldn't get over. How you just kept going, from one wounded boy to the next, never stopping." "Until I did," Silas said, the words bitter. She looked at him, her gaze steady and full of a surprising strength. "We all have a breaking point, Silas. The real question is what we do after we break." He met her gaze. He saw no judgment there, only understanding, and something else, something that looked a little like faith. He stood up suddenly, breaking the spell. "We should cook these. You need to get your strength back. We leave in 2 days." That night, as they ate rabbit stew by the fire, he told her about the cabin. He had built it with his brother Elijah before the war. They had planned to open a medical practice here together, to serve the people no one else would. "What happened to him?" she asked. "Antietam," he said. The single word was heavy with a universe of pain. "He was a field surgeon too. A shell hit the aid station." "I'm sorry. After Julia died," he went on, "I came back here. I thought maybe I could still live his dream. But I couldn't." His mouth twisted into a bitter smile. "This cabin was as far as I got." Later, as she was getting ready for sleep, she saw him looking at the ledger again. His face was grim in the firelight. "What are you going to do?" she asked quietly. "About Preston?" He closed the book. "I don't know yet," he said, "but I know one thing." He looked up at her, and his eyes were burning with a cold fire she hadn't seen before. "I'm done running." 2 days later, at dawn, they left the cabin behind. They rode north, deeper into the mountains. The abandoned mining town Silas had told her about, a place called Redemption, was their destination. As they rode, he taught her things: how to read the tracks in the dirt, how to know where to find water. He was teaching her how to survive. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked during a short rest. "Civilization." He was quiet for a long moment. "Sometimes," he admitted, "books, music." He glanced at her. "The company of someone who understands more than just how to stay alive." The admission hung in the air between them. He turned away quickly, uncomfortable with his own honesty. "We should go." They reached Redemption as the sun was setting. It was a ghost town, nestled in a high mountain valley. Weathered, empty buildings lined a single dusty street. "Welcome to Redemption," Silas said with a dry sort of irony. "Named by optimists, abandoned by everyone else." It looked completely deserted, but as they rode down the main street, she could feel eyes on them, watching from the darkened windows. He led her to a small cabin, set apart from the others. "This belonged to a friend of my brother's," he explained. "He passed away last winter." The cabin was dusty, but it was solid. Shelter. For now it was enough. That night Silas insisted on taking the first watch. He stood by the window, his revolver in his hand, a silent guardian in the darkness. Catherine lay on the narrow bed, too exhausted to sleep. She watched his silhouette, a man so used to being alone that he wore solitude like a second skin. She must have drifted off because the next thing she knew, he was shaking her shoulder. "Someone's coming," he whispered, his voice tense. She was instantly awake. Through the window she could see a lantern, bobbing through the darkness, coming straight toward their cabin. "Who is it?" she whispered. "I don't know," he said, his gun raised. The lantern got closer, illuminating the face of a very old man, his face a roadmap of wrinkles. Silas visibly relaxed. He lowered his gun. "It's okay. It's just old Sam." He opened the door just as the old man was about to knock. "Thought that might be you, Doc," the old man said, his voice surprisingly strong. "Saw the smoke from your chimney." "Hello, Sam," Silas said. The old man, Sam, shuffled inside. His eyes widened when he saw Catherine. "Well now, got yourself some company. That's new." He was carrying a small basket. "Brought you some bread," he said, setting it on the table. "Can't have new neighbors going hungry." "That's very kind of you," Catherine said, touched by the gesture. Sam waved her thanks away. Then he looked at Silas, his old eyes sharp and perceptive. "You running from something, Doc? You got that look about you again." "Just passing through, Sam," Silas said, his face a closed book. The old man nodded slowly. He looked at Catherine again, at the careful way she moved. "You hurt, miss?" Before she could answer, Silas stepped in. "She's healing. I'm taking care of it." Sam nodded, a look of approval on his face. "Good to see you, doctoring again. Been too long." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. He looked back at them, and his expression was suddenly serious. "A word of advice," he said. "Whatever it is you're running from, it always finds you in the end. Better to turn and face it on your own terms." With that, he was gone, his lantern a disappearing speck of light in the darkness. "What did he mean by that?" Catherine asked. "Sam's got his own ghosts," Silas said, bolting the door. He went back to the window, resuming his watch. The old man's words echoed in her mind. Better to face it on your own terms. She looked at Silas, standing there alone in the dark. She looked at the worn medical bag on the floor. She thought about the ledger, hidden in her bag. And in the quiet of that dusty, forgotten cabin, Catherine Montgomery started to form a plan. It was a dangerous plan, a reckless plan. But it was better than running. The next morning, Silas went into what was left of the town to see what he could learn. He came back a few hours later, his face grim. "They were here," he said without preamble. "Whitfield's men. They were in the next settlement 3 days ago, asking questions, looking for a man and a woman." "They're closing in," Catherine whispered. "We need to move. Soon," he said. "Where, Silas?" she asked, a new fire in her voice. "How long do we run? There has to be another way." She pointed to the ledger on the table. "We have this. We can take it to the authorities." "What authorities?" he scoffed. "A sheriff on Whitfield's payroll? A territorial marshal who won't care about crimes committed a decade ago?" "Then we go higher," she insisted, "to the governor in Helena." "Helena is a week's ride from here," he said, his voice hard. "Through open country. It's a suicide mission." "It's a chance." He had brought a newspaper back with him. She glanced at the headline, and her blood ran cold. "Territorial election nears. Whitfield poised for victory." "He's running for office," she said, her voice a horrified whisper. "Territorial representative," Silas confirmed. "The election is in 3 weeks. If he wins, he'll be untouchable. They were calling him a pillar of the community, a man of vision." "Then we have to expose him," she said, her voice shaking with a cold fury. "Before the election, we have to show them who he really is." Before he could answer, there was a frantic pounding at the door. "Doc! Doc Thornton!" a voice cried out. "It's Sam! I need help!" Silas threw the door open. Sam was standing there, holding up a young boy who couldn't have been more than 10 years old. The boy's face was gray, and a bloody bandage was wrapped around his arm. "My grandson," Sam gasped. "Rattlesnake." In an instant, everything changed. "Bring him in," Silas commanded, his voice all surgeon again. "Put him on the bed." Catherine flew into action, clearing the bed, gathering cloths. Silas ripped the bandage off. 2 angry puncture wounds, surrounded by swollen, discolored flesh. "Catherine, I need hot water," he ordered, already pulling instruments from his bag. "Clean cloths, now." She watched him as she worked. The haunted man was gone. The doctor was back. He was calm, focused, completely in command. He was saving a life. He worked for hours, cleaning the wound, drawing out the venom, fighting the infection. He never stopped, never hesitated. Near midnight, the boy's fever broke. Silas checked his pulse. A small, tired smile touched his lips. "He's going to make it," he whispered to Catherine. "You saved him," she said, her voice full of awe. He looked at her, and for the first time, the wall between them seemed to crumble. "I didn't forget how," he admitted quietly. "I just couldn't bear to be that person anymore." "He's still there," she said gently. "The healer." "Maybe," he said, his gaze returning to the sleeping boy. "And maybe I'm just now remembering why it mattered." The next morning, Sam stood in the doorway, his face etched with a gratitude so profound, it was humbling. "I owe you a debt, Doc," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Anything you need. Anything at all. You just have to ask." It wasn't just a thank you. It was a pledge. An oath. After he left, Catherine asked, "What was that about?" "Sam was a scout for the Union Army during the war," Silas said, staring out the window. "He knows these mountains like the back of his hand." Understanding dawned on her. "So if we wanted to get to Helena—" "He knows paths that aren't on any map," Silas finished for her. He turned to face her, his expression serious. "I'm considering it, Catherine. I'm considering all our options." "What changed?" she asked softly. "Last night," he said, "saving that boy. It reminded me that some fights are worth having, that giving up isn't always the answer." He took a deep breath. "Julia would have wanted me to fight. She never ran from anything." The tender moment was shattered by another knock at the door, a frantic, urgent banging. It was Sam again. His face was pale. "Riders," he said, breathless. "4 of them, armed to the teeth. They're in town, and they're asking for you." The hunt was over. They had been found. "How long do we have?" Silas asked, already grabbing their bags. "Minutes," Sam said. "They're going door to door. And Doc, it's not just hired guns." He looked Silas square in the eye. "Whitfield is with them." "There's a tunnel," Sam said, his voice a low, urgent whisper, "behind the old assayer's office. An old mining shaft. It comes out on the north slope of the ridge. I can get horses ready." "Go," Silas told Catherine. They grabbed their meager belongings. The ledger was the most important thing. They followed Sam through the back alleys of the dead town. He led them to a dilapidated shed. Under a pile of rotten canvas was a trap door. "It's a tight squeeze at first," Sam said, handing Silas a lantern. "It'll take you under the ridge. I'll meet you on the other side with the horses." Silas helped Catherine down into the darkness. The air was cold and smelled of damp earth. "Sam," Silas said, looking up at the old man, "why are you doing this?" "You saved my boy," Sam said simply. "A debt is a debt. Now go." He slammed the trapdoor shut, plunging them into absolute blackness, except for the small, flickering light of the lantern. They moved as fast as they could through the narrow tunnel. It opened up into a larger mine shaft, the timbers groaning with age above them. They could hear shouting from behind them, faint at first, then getting louder. "They found it," Silas said grimly. He blew out the lantern. "Run." They stumbled through the darkness, their only guide the faint hint of light at the far end of the tunnel. They burst out into the cool morning air, blinking in the sudden brightness. Sam was there, just as he promised, with 2 horses. "They're right behind you," he yelled. They scrambled into the saddles. As they did, 3 men appeared at the mouth of the tunnel. The first one was tall, dressed in an expensive suit that was now covered in dirt. Preston Whitfield. His face was a mask of cold fury. He raised a pistol. Shots rang out. They dug their heels into their horses' sides and galloped away, bullets whistling past their ears. "The high pass," Sam yelled, pointing to a steep, winding trail that led up the mountain. "Follow it to the ridge. I'll slow them down." They rode like the devil was chasing them, because he was. The trail was treacherous, a narrow ribbon of dirt on the side of a mountain, but they didn't dare slow down. Hours later, near the top of the ridge, they paused to let the horses breathe. They looked back. There was no sign of pursuit. "We lost them," Catherine said, breathless. Silas was scanning the valley below them. His face was tight. No, we didn't, he pointed. Down in the valley, moving along the river, was another group of riders, 4 of them, and they were heading straight for the old trapper's cabin Sam had told them about. He split them up, Silas said, his voice a low growl. He sent some after us, and the others to cut us off. He's smarter than I thought. They were trapped. The hunters were behind them, and a trap was waiting in front of them. What do we do? Catherine asked, the hope draining out of her. Silas was silent for a long moment, his eyes scanning the rugged landscape. He looked at the impossible peaks, the deep valleys. He looked at the path behind them and the trap in front of them. Then he looked at her, and in his eyes she saw the fear was gone. The doubt was gone. All that was left was a cold, hard resolve. We stop running, he said, his voice quiet but firm. He wants a fight. We'll give him one. But we'll do it on our terms, not his. Hope flared back to life inside her. You mean? I mean we're going to Helena, he said. We're going to take this ledger to the governor, and we're going to burn Preston Whitfield's world to the ground. He looked at her, and for the first time, he let her see everything. The pain, the loss, but also a fierce, protective light that she had never seen before. Preston Whitfield has taken enough from both of us, he said. I won't let him take our future too. The way he said our future sent a shiver down her spine. I want that future, Silas, she said softly. A real smile, the first she had ever seen, transformed his face. It erased the years of pain, and for a second, she saw the man he must have been before the world broke him. Then let's go get it, he said. He turned his horse, not down into the valley, but east along the high, dangerous ridge, toward a path that wasn't a path at all, toward Helena. They were no longer running away from the past. They were riding straight into the future, and they would face it together. The journey to Helena was a brutal testament to survival. For 4 days, they rode through a wilderness that seemed determined to break them. They followed game trails so faint they were nearly invisible, crossed roaring rivers of melted snow that threatened to sweep the horses from their feet, and slept in short, fitful bursts, always with one eye open. Silas was transformed. He was no longer the haunted man from the cabin. He was a leader, a protector. He seemed to know the mountains intimately, as if the land itself were an old friend. He found shelter where there seemed to be none, food where the landscape looked barren. He was a force of nature in his own right, and Catherine found herself looking at him with a sense of awe. The bond between them deepened with every shared hardship. A look across a campfire, a hand offered to help her over a difficult patch of trail, the shared warmth of a blanket on a freezing night. These small moments wove a connection stronger than any words. They didn't speak of the future, or of what they felt. They didn't have to. It was there, in the quiet spaces between them, a living, breathing thing. On the 5th day, they crested a hill and saw it in the distance. Helena. It wasn't a grand city, but to them, it was a beacon of hope, a promise of an ending to their ordeal. They rode into town not as desperate fugitives, but with a quiet dignity. They found a small, clean boarding house, and for the first time in weeks, they slept in real beds, behind a locked door, without the fear of an attack in the night. The next morning, they walked to the Territorial Capitol building. It was an imposing stone structure, a symbol of law and order in a lawless land. Silas carried the small wooden box, the ledger that held their fate nestled safely inside. They were told the governor was a busy man. They were told they would need an appointment. But Silas, with a calm determination that brooked no argument, insisted. He told the governor's aide that they had evidence of criminal activity that would affect the upcoming election. Evidence that concerned Mr. Preston Whitfield. That name was a key that unlocked the door. They were led into a large wood-paneled office. Governor Benjamin Potts sat behind a massive desk, a man with tired eyes and the weight of a territory on his shoulders. Silas placed the wooden box on the desk. He didn't speak. He simply opened it and pushed the ledger forward. For the next hour there was silence in the office, broken only by the rustle of turning pages. The governor read, his expression growing grimmer with each entry. He read about the bribes, the diluted medicine, the lives destroyed by one man's insatiable greed. When he finally looked up, his face was like stone. "This is monstrous," he said, his voice a low rumble. He looked from Silas to Catherine. You realize the accusations you are making, Mr. Thornton? They are not accusations, Governor, Silas said, his voice steady. They are facts, and that book is the proof. Preston Whitfield is a powerful man, the governor warned. He has friends in high places. To bring him down will not be easy. We are not looking for easy, sir, Catherine said, speaking for the first time. We are looking for justice. The governor studied them for a long moment. He saw the scars on Silas's face and the unwavering resolve in Catherine's eyes. He saw two people who had been through hell and had come out the other side, not broken, but forged into something stronger. He closed the ledger. Then justice is what you shall have. What happened next happened fast. Armed with the ledger, the territorial marshals moved with swift, brutal efficiency. They didn't go after Whitfield directly at first. They went after the men on his payroll, the corrupt officials and bribe suppliers, whose names filled the pages of the little black book. Faced with irrefutable proof of their crimes, they broke. One by one, they confessed, each story adding another layer to the dark tapestry of Whitfield's corruption. Preston Whitfield was arrested 2 days later, not in a dramatic shootout, but at a fancy political dinner, where he was being lauded as Montana's next great leader. He was surrounded by the very men he sought to impress when the marshals walked in, their faces grim, their warrants held high. The look of shock and disbelief on his face was, Silas would later admit, almost worth everything they had been through. The trial was the talk of the territory. The newspaper headlines that had once praised him now screamed his condemnation. The evidence was overwhelming. The ledger, backed by the testimony of the men he had corrupted, painted a picture of a man so devoid of morality that he would sell poison to dying soldiers for a few extra dollars. Silas was called to testify. He stood before the court, not as a fugitive, but as Dr. Silas Thornton, a surgeon of the 12th Virginia Regiment. He told the story of the tainted medicine in Richmond, of the 12 patients who had died, of the wife he had lost. He spoke without anger, his voice a flat, factual account of a tragedy that had shattered his life. When he finished, a heavy silence hung over the courtroom. Preston Whitfield was found guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to life in prison, his wealth confiscated, his name forever stained with disgrace. Justice, it turned out, had not been a casualty of the war after all. It had just been sleeping. In the weeks that followed, Silas and Catherine found a quiet rhythm to their new life in Helena. The ghosts of the past were still there, but they no longer held the same power. The constant running had been replaced by a peaceful stillness. One evening, they walked to a bluff overlooking the city. The sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and purple. It reminded Silas of the sunsets Michael Montgomery had talked about all those years ago. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the silver watch. He looked at the hands, still frozen at 8:17. For years, that moment had been the end of his world. With a sudden, decisive movement, he wound the watch. For the first time in nearly a decade, the hands began to move. The quiet ticking was the sound of a life restarting. He turned to Catherine. The setting sun caught the light in her hair, and in that moment, he saw not just a survivor, but his future. Elijah, my brother, he said softly. He always wanted to start a practice in a place that needed a doctor, a place like Redemption. Catherine smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that lit up her whole face. I think he would have liked that, she said, and I think the people of Redemption would be lucky to have you. Tahava, he corrected gently. He took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. It felt right. It felt like coming home. The past was a map of scars, a testament to where they had been and what they had endured. But for the first time, they weren't looking back. They were looking forward at the open road ahead, a future they would build together, one steady, ticking second at a time. Their story is a powerful reminder that even in the darkest of times, when it feels like all hope is lost, the fight for what is right is always a fight worth having. It shows that one or two people armed with the truth can indeed change the world, or at least their small corner of it. If you were moved by the story of Silas and Catherine's fight for justice, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. There are countless stories of courage and redemption out there, just waiting to be told.